When we hear the words Dark Ages, we often imagine a time of chaos, ignorance, and backwardness. A world plunged into darkness after the fall of Rome, where people lived in fear, forgot how to read and write, and civilization itself seemed to stand still. But was it really that dark? Or is history hiding something from us? Let's discover the truth behind one of the most misunderstood periods in human history. The term Dark Ages usually refers to the early medieval period, roughly from the 5th to the 10th century, following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. With the fall of Rome, Europe lost its central government, its massive army, and its complex systems of roads and trade. Cities emptied, and the great libraries and institutions that once flourished fell into ruin. For centuries, historians looked at this period and saw only decline. But if we look closer, we find something surprising. The so-called Dark Ages were not a time of stagnation. They were a time of transformation, innovation, and the birth of something new. Across Europe, new kingdoms and cultures were rising from the ashes of the old empire. The Franks, the Goths, the Anglo-Saxons. These were not just barbarians tearing down civilization. They were building their own. Take the Carolingian Renaissance, for example. Under the rule of Charlemagne in the 8th and 9th centuries, there was a revival of art, culture, and learning. Charlemagne valued education and invited scholars from all over Europe to his court. He ordered the copying of ancient texts, preserving works of Latin literature and philosophy that might otherwise have been lost forever. Monks in monasteries across Europe spent their lives carefully writing and illustrating manuscripts by hand, keeping the flame of knowledge alive. And speaking of monasteries, they were not just places of prayer, they were centers of innovation. Monks experimented with agriculture, developed new farming techniques, and cleared forests to create productive land. They brewed beer, developed medicinal herbs, and kept detailed records of the natural world. The monastic movement was one of the most powerful forces for preservation and progress during this time. Meanwhile, beyond Europe, other civilizations were thriving. The Islamic world was experiencing its golden age, with scholars in Baghdad making groundbreaking advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. In China, the Tang dynasty was flourishing, inventing woodblock printing and gunpowder. In the Americas, the Maya were building great cities and developing complex calendars. The world was not dark everywhere. Europe was simply going through a transition. Even in Europe, daily life was not as grim as we imagine. The majority of people were farmers, living in small communities bound by tradition and mutual support. They celebrated festivals, told stories, and passed down songs and legends from generation to generation. The great epic poems like Beowulf and the Song of Roland come from this period, showing us a world of heroism, loyalty, and deep cultural roots. The Vikings themselves, whom we discussed in another video, were a product of this age. Their raids and explorations were part of the larger movement of peoples that shaped medieval Europe. They were not just destroyers, they were traders, settlers, and storytellers who left their mark on the languages and cultures of the lands they touched. By the end of the 10th century, Europe was beginning to emerge from its isolation. Trade routes were reopening, towns were growing, and the foundations of the great medieval kingdoms were being laid. The so-called darkness was giving way to a new dawn, the High Middle Ages, with its magnificent cathedrals, its universities, and its flowering of art and thought. So, were the Dark Ages really dark? The answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. Yes, it was a time of upheaval and loss, but it was also a time of adaptation, survival, and quiet progress. It was a bridge between the ancient world and the medieval world, a period that shaped the languages, nations, and cultures of modern Europe. The people who lived during this time were not ignorant savages. They were our ancestors, building the foundations of the world we know today. The legacy of the Dark Ages lives on in the stories we tell, the books we read, and the very structure of our societies. And through this video, we hope we've given you a new perspective on a period that deserves to be understood, not just labeled. Thank you for watching.